Welcome, everybody. We're just going to wait a few minutes, or not even a few minutes, a second or two here. All right, welcome, everybody, to Awarewolf Radio. This is Justin Deschamps, your host, founder of Stillness in the Storm. And we've got a really special show for you today. We're going to be getting all into the Reddit/Gamestop rebellion, as it's being called. There was a massive event that happened last week. This is unmistakably something big is going on. And so we're going to get into a lot of that today. Before we do, I want to go ahead and just do a couple of brief announcements. First, we're going to start getting into a lot of content on Awarewolf Radio and Stillness in the Storm show. So if you haven't already, go to Rumble and Bitchute and sign up for Stillness in the Storm there. Subscribe to the channel, because it's entirely likely Stillness in the Storm YouTube will be taken down as a result of some of the information we're going to start to bring forward. We also have lots of big things happening. Oh, by the way, also go into the description of this video. I placed the links for Rumble and Bitchute in there. So go ahead and make sure you subscribe to that, because we're going to start to have a lot of cool stuff happen. Stillness in the Storm has exploded in the past month or two, and we've got a lot of big things happening, things we're going to be launching here in the next couple weeks. A really awesome series on the corporate versus republic, United States of America, some things that a lot of people really aren't talking about that have remained hidden for a long time, with that story of how the United States became a corporation after the Civil War. And this is going to be supported by some of the most sweeping documentation I've ever encountered with respect to this topic. So massive story there, and it's all related to what we're dealing with right now. So make sure you go there. Also, please, if you haven't already done so, go to Stillness in the Storm /donate. That's Stillness in the Storm /donate. If we weren't supported by viewers and readers like you, we could not do this show. Big tech has been assaulting us every chance they get. They've stripped us of our social media. They took our ability away to generate ad revenue. So if it wasn't for donations and support from our viewers and our readers, we couldn't continue on. So for as little as the price of a cup of coffee, a meal, a month, you can help keep this store alive, our website alive, I should say, and the work we're doing alive. And we got a lot of awesome things coming. So your support is greatly needed during this time of expansion. So thank you so much for all of that support. Also, in the links, you'll find a description for EMF Harmonized, which is a great way to protect yourself from electromagnetic radiation. If you haven't already figured it out yet, these cell phones that we use in the modern world have a ton of nasty stuff on them. And with a device like this, you can actually protect yourself from this electromagnetic radiation, because it uses a kind of Tesla technology, scalar wave technology. The cell phones, they produce electromagnetic frequencies that are tuned to the same frequency that our own bodies use. So imagine it's like two people trying to have a conversation, and there's somebody with a bullhorn right in between you trying to scream to prevent your cells from communicating. That's what this cell phone, Wi-Fi, Gwen Tower, all these types of electromagnetic frequency disruption technology does. What this does is it takes those frequencies and it retunes them, and it turns them into something that's actually beneficial while mitigating their damage. So EMF Harmonized, go to Stillness in the Storm /EMF Harmonized. You can also check the link below. Really awesome products. And the guy I know who makes this personally, he's a great guy. Really awesome products he's making. So with all that, we're going to go ahead and talk about this story. So if you aren't aware, I'm going to go ahead and pop into the description of the video here a really great article. I've been trying to get my head wrapped around this thing ever since it happened. If you aren't familiar with the stock market and how it works, it's just kind of confusing. So basically what happened is last week we had something really kind of unprecedented happen. And that was a group of people on Reddit using a Discord server and also communicating on Reddit itself, which is a massive group. I believe there is 1 to 2 million people, got aware of the fact that basically the stock market was being rigged by massive hedge funds. Hedge funds, what they do is they manipulate the price. And I'll tell you the punchline. I'm going to explain how it works. So how does this work? Or what's the punchline? The punchline is that what hedge funds will do is they'll take their power as a hedge fund and they'll systematically lower a price of a stock after they've sold a bunch of stock. And once they do that, they can make massive amounts of money basically by destroying a company using the power of price manipulation of the stocks. Now, some people on Reddit got wind of this and they decided, well, we're going to take advantage of this dip in the stock price and we're going to mass buy up all this stock that is going to be devalued. And in the process, we're going to make a little money. And what they did is not only did they put a kind of big wrench in the gears of this systematic destruction of a company operation that these hedge funds were doing, but they actually were able to make way more money than hedge fund even was going to be able to make. So this is huge. It's being called a revolution because it's something that the stock market has been doing for years. And really, people knew about it, but not to the extent, as far as I can tell, that would allow people to really do anything about it or even take advantage of it. So I went live before I had a chance to put in the links. I just put the links in the description now. So if you're going, just getting to this video, go ahead and look in the description, refresh this video, and you'll see an article that I wrote called "The Banking Cabal and Globalists Are Terrified and Pissed About the GameStop Revolution. They Don't Want You to Know and Use Their Secrets." So how does this work? Real briefly, and then we're going to bring on our special guests because there's something really unprecedented happening and a really great opportunity to protect yourself given what's about to happen. So basically the way it works is you have a stock market. Let's imagine you have a company like ABC Oil. ABC Oil has 10,000 shares of a stock, and the stock is valued at $100 a share. A hedge fund will buy up or get lent to them like 80% of the total stocks that are out there. So they'll get like 8,000 stocks, and then they'll start to mass sell off all of this stock. In the process of selling it off, let's say they all sell their stocks off and they average about a price of $90 a share. So they made a bunch of money by selling the stock, or they've earned a lot of capital. In the process of the stock being sold, it'll go down in value because people see a massive amount of stock being sold and there's a mass sell-off and people freak out. They also, due to the price demand and surplus principle in any market, really, if there's a large amount of surplus of any commodity, anything that you're trying to sell, it's going to make that price go down. Just like if demand goes up really high, it's going to make the price go up. So this is the way these hedge funds do it. That fictitious company, ABC Oil, their price of their stock goes from $100 down to like $20 over the course of, it could be as little as a couple days while this mass sell-off is happening. Then they return the stock, or they buy it back and give it back to the person who originally had it. And they only have to buy it back at whatever the value is now. So you can imagine if you sell, if you sell 8,000 shares of stock at $90 on average, and then you buy that stock back, the same 8,000 shares at only $20, you've made a whole bunch of money, like a massive amount of money. And that's what these hedge funds do. They literally are manipulating markets. This isn't like some conspiracy theory. This is unquestionably what happens. Anybody with a little bit of time and research can figure this out for themselves. So this Reddit and this Reddit community and a few other communities have figured out a way to know when this sell-off is about to happen and then buy up the stock. And so in this case, it was GameStop. As this hedge fund was selling off all their stock that they had for GameStop, people were buying it up. And instead of there being this massive surplus of the stock available in the market, there was almost none. And there was this from a perspective of buying, as a stockbroker, you're seeing massive amounts of stock being sold and it immediately being purchased. Anybody with sense in the stock market is going to say, wait a minute, there's something that's happening here. I want to get in on that. So the demand went way up. And I believe the last time I checked, the price of the GameStop stock had gone up something like 4 or 5 times what it originally started off. So the people who owned the stock, the little people, the regular people, as I call in this article, made a ton of money. And this imploded the hedge fund because the hedge fund was anticipating buying back the stock at 20% of its value. Now it's 5 times more than the original price. So to our fictitious name that we came up with, this company that we came up with, ABC Oil, instead of it being $100 that it was originally valued at, it's now $500. Well, these hedge funds, they all have money lent to them. That's the way that they're over leveraged. So for the amount of money they have, they might have, like, just for easy numbers, they might have $1 million in capital in the bank, but they have they have like 40 million in loans. And so what that means is if their transaction doesn't go the way they anticipate, then it's going to destroy the company. And a lot of people are up in arms, and there's a lot of shenanigans happening. Politicians are calling for these Redditors and more regulations to be put forth so it stops people like these economic terrorists from messing with the hedge fund market. And there's other people, most of the population are saying, wait a minute, it's like rules for thee and not for me, like somehow rules for me and not for thee kind of thing. Like somehow I can't use the very same rules and regulations and laws that you use, hedge fund, to make money, but you can use them. How does that make any sense? So as you can imagine, it's a massive conspiracy, massive issue. So there's a lot to talk about here, what it could mean, the kind of conspiratorial aspect behind it, which I definitely think there's probably a lot going on here. So to have that discussion, we're going to have on a guest we've had on the show, Dustin Nemos. Dustin Nemos is doing a lot of great work. He's got his website, dustinnemos.com, and whitehatmovement.com, and Red Pill Living, which are really great places to get all sorts of good stuff. So with that, Dustin, great to have you on. How's it going?
Hey, Justin, it's good to be back. Hey, everyone calls me Justin until I remind them to the D. Like, no one's ever called Dustin.
I know. In a show like this, people probably get really confused, like who's who here, So, sure. Dustin, I mean, what is your take on this situation? I mean, there's a lot to talk about, but why don't we just start with, like, what do you think happened? Anything you want to add to the summary I gave?
I've got to do the disclaimer first, and I'm, not financial advice. This is all my opinion. And I didn't buy GameStop. I don't buy stock at all. I don't trust the stock market, period. Mm-hmm. But, you kind of just summarized that there was a sort of a raid on GameStop, a sort of a failing company. It started at actually like $20 or so, and they got it up to about $500 before shenanigans happened, and Robinhood and other brokerages began to limit things and stop trades and force people to liquidate their positions at less than it was actually worth. And some crazy things started to happen. And maybe Citadel and Melvin Capital, they might have pulled some strings, and it's gotten all the way up to, Janet Yellen and the press secretary's husband both have conflicts of interest around this company. So it's actually getting to be very interesting. We also, on the other side of that, have AOC and Ted Cruz and like Don Jr. on the same position against what they're doing by letting the hedge funds get away with this. I mean, they're essentially trying to let the hedge funds steal their money back after they got called out on a really stupid position. Yes, GameStop was a bad company. It's like the Blockbusters of video games, but they were betting 140% of the total stock. So it was a very easy position to short squeeze. So these traders, many of them knowing they would lose money, some of them got very wealthy, but many of them are in this to actually bring down the system. Now, that may or may not be legal. Like I said, I'm not going to even talk too much about the stock market, except as a little bit of pretext to what we're going, or context into what we're going into here. So with that strategy that they've just developed with GameStop and how it worked and just shot the price up immediately, and it destroyed almost $4 trillion in global market cap, 3.7, I think, and growing. And it's still, these hedge funds and some banks may still go bankrupt. They're desperately trying to borrow more and more and more right now to avoid that. And these guys are hanging on like a pit bull that just does not let go. They are buying and buying and buying, even though, at the later stages of the GameStop thing, it becomes a bit of probably a bit of a Ponzi scheme. People are going to start to lose on the way out because no one will buy that for that price. But they will have done so much damage in the meantime to some of these elite hedge funds that they've learned a new trick. Now, this is where I want to shift and quit talking about GameStop, because that's kind of like the appetizer. The main course, in my opinion, is their next move. Now that they're boosted in confidence, they've got all this publicity and PR, and I'm trying to give them as much attention as I can because I like what they're about with this next move, at least. Again, not financial advice, but they're actually going to try to destroy the price suppression of physical metals, specifically silver, which is a tiny market compared to gold. We could never break that gold manipulation. But because there's so little silver available right now, industrial uses have used most of it up. The fundamentals are pretty strong. It's very suppressed for a long time. I could go into that side of it. I don't really need to. Essentially, they are going to try to destroy the banksters' manipulation of gold and silver, which is what allows, as a kind of an armchair economist and historian, layperson and hobbyist, that's what allows central banks to print, and governments to spend beyond their means on the credit card while we have to pay through inflation, the secret hidden tax. If we destroy the price suppression of silver, I believe the cascade effect could destroy the central bank and therefore the dollar, and therefore it could force us back onto the gold standard and away from the Federal Reserve, which has been this country's battle since the very beginning, to get away from the Bank of England and then to get away from the first incarnation of what's now the Federal Reserve. Andrew Jackson, I killed the Bank Jackson, one of President Trump's heroes, one of my heroes as well. His mission, he campaigned on to get rid of the central bank, and he did, and then they came back. So, people have been assassinated. These guys are pretty evil. This is their one weak point. This is the weakness in the armor, the wooden stake to the vampire's heart, or the silver bullet to the werewolf. There's scarcity and fundamentals and stuff coming into this, but really with what they're doing and the size that they have grown to 6 million now, they could make a huge dent, more than the Hunt brothers ever even touched. And to that point, the internet is now sold out of silver. If you go check and try to buy as of right now, Sunday night, it's gone. They're saying we'll try to reopen on Monday, but all of the major suppliers have sold out. The price is starting to skyrocket. It's already been difficult to get a lot of the different types of silver. People have been down to a certain type. There's only like 5 or 6 in some cases that left, but now even that's starting to get sold out. So the only thing really available anymore, like the $100 instead of $30 ounces, because they're artistic or commemorative or something in that nature. And that's a collectible. That's different. So, we're at the point where if this was a stock market trade, and some people are going to try to short the SLV, and I don't think that's the way to go, but that's just my opinion, because they have the power to manipulate with the ETFs, and that's how they suppress the price. If people go after the physical silver, they can't freeze trades with a brokerage. They can't shut it down. If they try to outlaw silver and gold, the price of silver and gold is going to go through the roof as other countries start to adopt it more and more anyway. And it shows the weakness. So anything that they can do, as far as I can tell, and I'm not an expert on this, I'm sure they'll think of something, is going to backfire on them. So we're at this like systemic weakness in the market because of all the debt and all of the leverage and everything else, the hedge funds, borrowing, like you said, 40-to-1 or more ratios of money. Then they have to cover that position. This cascade effect could cause systemic collapse. And that's why I'm excited about it. I'm pretty pumped because I've always been kind of an Austrian economist, and I followed, Dr. Ron Paul and the Mises Institute and Milton Friedman. This gold and silver is money. It's in the Constitution about coining, not printing. But they have tricked us into accepting slave money. The saying goes, gold is the money of kings, silver is the money of gentlemen, paper is the money of peasants, and debt is the money of slaves. So, you see where they're trying to put us from gold standard down to debt standard in just a generation. And in that time, we've also seen the greatest increase in almost every ill that you can think of: cultural breakdown, inequality, the rich are getting richer, and small businesses now destroyed. So at the end of the day, this seems to be a peaceful, nonviolent civil war in the stock market.
Right. Okay, so there's a lot to digest there. Let me ask a few questions just because I want to make this really clear for people, because I know this can be very confusing. So when it comes to the silver situation, it's very difficult to get silver, which means indications are that they might be trying to pull some type of short with silver. And therefore, if we, using our buying power, start to buy up silver, then we can get on the right side of this thing and potentially deal a massive blow to the CABAL economy, and in the process, safeguard ourselves in our need to support our families and things like this. Is that the short of it?
Yeah, it can help save and store your wealth for future generations. And that's what metals have always been good at as well. So if they're trying to create a great reset as they're doing now and push us all onto dependency and a credit or digital money system, having physical metals for barter in the future is very useful. But really imagine if you could get gold back when it was $200 and you knew it was going to go to 2,000.
Right.
That's kind of the situation I believe that we're in now. I think silver has been undervalued for decades. It's still at its early 1900 prices. You can't think of too many other assets like that. And now it's more used than ever, not less. It may have been used for money at one point, but now it's also used for industry, and industry is using most of it up. So there's not much left. The people that do mine it are not mining it for silver. They're mining copper and gold, and they're just getting some extra silver on the side. So it's not really worth it for them to mine it at the price. They've actually been losing money on silver. So there's a rigged market, and every time sort of an interest is in silver and it shoots up to 50 or something, the ETFs will print thousands or millions or whatever it takes of paper silver contracts like the SLV, and then they'll sell that on the market and crash the price back down, just like you said earlier, when there's a huge supply of silver, supposedly, because it's just paper, they'll print it up and crash the price. Now, that trick only works until the physical is gone. When the physical is gone, and that's happening right now, that trick fails, and you see the real price of silver emerge sometime in the near future. There's going to be a little bit of a delay in terms of the industrial demand, because most of them are smart enough to have stockpiled, but not much. The retail outlet, the retail investor is not usually the biggest mover in silver, but it may be about to be. So I think it's a good way to set yourself up in the future in terms of protection, but it's also a way to destroy a central bank's control mechanism in a way that it's very difficult for them to stop.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Okay, so just to make that abundantly clear for everybody, the current price of silver is suppressed. So that's the first point. So it's manipulated. Silver should be much higher than it is, but it's not. And they're manipulating for a lot of different reasons. Second point, one of the ways they keep silver prices low is they print what are basically called counterfeit silver certificates. So what a silver certificate is, or even a gold certificate is, it's a piece of paper that says, hey, you bought some silver, but you never take possession of the silver. So it's sitting in a warehouse somewhere. Well, just like, if you know anything about the history of central banking, this is kind of how the financial games work. They lend more than they actually have. So if they're suppressing the price of silver by printing silver certificates, then that means there's probably not the silver they think. And so a bunch of people buy these silver certificates thinking that there's silver. There isn't any. And what does it do? It lowers the price of silver, and they can keep it deflated. Yeah. Now, the problem is that if the physical silver disappears, then that trick isn't going to work anymore. And so we kind of have two weapons, we might say, against corruption, to put it that way. By buying up physical silver, we safeguard ourselves, which is a side point, but we prevent this fake silver market from really taking off because we've got the silver stuff, the real stuff. And it exposes this counterfeit silver market, basically. So it kind of exposes another layer of this short selling manipulation game that they've been doing. So really important to think about it. One last thing I want to say about this is that imagine 10 years ago, I want to say it was like 10 years ago. When did Bitcoin come out? Like 10 years ago, something like that, right?
A little bit more, I think, now than 10, but yeah.
Okay. So imagine if you bought 100 Bitcoin when they were like, what, $100? I mean, you'd be a millionaire, right?
I was a silver guy, and I didn't buy the Bitcoin when it was like 2 pennies. And but anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, this is kind of one of those opportunities now. You might be thinking to yourself, oh, guys, this just sounds like another get in while it's hot kind of scam. But, that's not necessarily the case here. First of all, we got to realize that we're living in a world where we do have piracy. There is lawlessness everywhere. We live in a color of law world. I study the law. I could be the first one to tell you. But, we have to survive, and we have to use the tools we have at our advantage to not only survive, but so we can fight another day, but then to use these to our advantage to take down a very corrupt system and really start to use our power as people in the marketplace and things like this. So, okay, great. So did you have anything else you wanted to say on that before we move on?
A few points to what you were saying. First, I also want to mention, besides the scarcity and suppression, also the inflation adjustment itself. It hasn't really been inflation adjusted, but inflation itself will fail if you see like the price of gold or silver going up 10, 20% a year consistently. People are going to stop leaving their money in the savings account in the bank and the dollar, and they're going to put it in gold and silver because it's like an obvious choice. That's where the ETF comes in really handy to try to manipulate that down so people think it's worthless crap and a relic. Mm-hmm. But tyranny only works until they can't pay for the soldiers, right? And they can continue to pay, and as long as there's one slave left to drain through this inflationary boom bust central bank system, they can continue to pay forever using us as the credit card. This takes back the power of the central bank, and it creates de facto the new currency, because people will start to lose faith in the dollar and gain faith in things like this as they see it squeezed. Now, gold we could never touch because there's so much and it's stockpiled, but silver's almost run out anyway, and it's a much smaller market. So, 6 million people jumping on this in the next week, it's already sold out. I'm sure we're going to see it double, in my opinion, but I think we could see it go up to 500 an ounce, 1,000 an ounce. These are bold claims, but, think about historical terms, the fall of Rome, right? The greatest empire that supposedly ever lived until America. The fall of Rome fell because the soldiers took over. Mm-hmm. And that was the sort of the beginning of the end. They ruled for a long time, and then this problem continued again for them, and then they fell apart too. But the problem was inflation. The problem was that somebody was manipulating the currency supply. Gold and silver coins were having bronze and copper added into them to make them a little bit less valuable. And eventually the soldiers rebelled. When their money was not paying for much anymore, then the whole system falls apart and the tyranny falls apart. And you may end up with a different sort of tyranny. We don't want a military dictatorship either. But when you take away that ability to live off of others as a credit card through inflation, which is a system most people just don't understand, and that's why it works, then you limit the ability of governments to live beyond their means. Governments shrink 99%. They have to live within their tax base. They have to treat us nicely if they want taxes, and they don't have the same kind of power to dominate and demonize and tyrannize us. So this is in my opinion, the silver bullet to the beast system. And I think it has a lot of power because people are awake now and they're ready for this. And there's already 6 million people about to jump into this thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So for a little history on this, guys, I strongly suggest watching the documentary by Bill Still called The Secret of Oz. It goes through the history of basically silver and gold and fiat currency manipulation. There's a lot of confusion out there right now about, gold being the best thing since sliced bread, or gold being horrible, or fiat currency being, the mark of the beast, or fiat currency being the thing that can save us. So as somebody who studies the law and currency, I can tell you there's a ton of confusion, and this history can really help you get your head wrapped around this. To give you a little indication, many times throughout history, we've had financial systems prior to the Empire of Rome, for example, is what you were getting into, Dustin. We used copper coins, or they used copper coins, I should say. And we didn't have a gold-backed currency back then, or they didn't have a gold-backed currency back then, the Romans. And then right at around the turn of the 1st century, when the Julio-Claudians started to come in, or zero, I should say. So when the Roman Empire really began, they switched to a gold-backed currency only, and it caused massive issues, and they systematically imploded the currency. And they've done it through using other ways. So the key point I'm getting at here is it's not that gold is the bad guy or the savior. It's that you have to see it in a big picture. What does the actual economic landscape look like if they're using a fiat currency system, and then people start using silver because they want to pull their money out of a savings account, which, by the way, I don't know if you knew this, but every dollar you have in a savings account gives that bank that has it financial resources to do fractional reserve banking.
They borrow it and they lend it.
Exactly. So yeah, that's the whole point, is that there's a lot of manipulation that happens, and it could be gold this time, it could be silver this time, it could be devaluing the fiat currency. So it's not that one is objectively bad, it's the way it's used. That's where the funky shenanigans can come in. So, one thing I wanted to remind everybody too is that when we have real resources in hand, whether it's gold, silver, a skill, anything like this, then that is intrinsically valuable. Whether or not the financial system, whether or not your Federal Reserve dollars stop being worth anything, won't be as much of a problem because you have actual real resources that can be switched into whatever currency you want. So wanted to throw that out there for people to consider. Now, I kind of wanted to get into the what ifs here. Now, when I saw this GameStop rebellion happening, when I saw the reaction from Congress, it felt frankly like a concocted event. It felt like a manipulated event. I felt like, first of all, it's not like this idea of short selling is something new. It's not like people in the regular world, regular people, as I called them in the article, couldn't buy up stocks as they were being sold in one of these short sales. So why isn't that this was happening for, beforehand? Well, think about what's happening right now. We have Joe Biden in office. Him and his cronies want to institute the Great Reset and kind of reboot the whole financial system. What needs to happen historically for a massive reboot of a financial system to take place? Well, if you've studied anything about bankruptcy law, especially sovereign debt bankruptcy, what often tends to happen is when massive reorganizations of an economy happen, it's usually because there's a massive bankruptcy, there's a massive economic calamity, and then we have to reset the system. So don't you think it's a little interesting that all of these things seem to be happening right as a time when Biden, I don't even think he's been in office for more than like 2 weeks at this point, and there's this massive financial apocalypse that's happening just around the corner when this Great Reset is supposed to be happening. What are some of your thoughts on this? What do you think about all that?
I want to remind people that Venezuela had a better standard of living per citizen than Texas at one point, and now they're eating out of dumpsters, and that was a generation away. Yeah. So communism has a lot of power, and if you think it can't happen to our greenback dollar, just think about this. They've nearly doubled the currency base in a year. They've had extra printers running full time all the time, printing out those papers that we exchange goods and services and our life force for. And they're stealing the value every time they print. And they're buying all of the assets. The Federal Reserve has such a huge asset sheet right now. They've owned almost everything, the way that the Federal Reserve of Japan does as well. The Bank of Japan owns most of the stock market of Japan. They've been dealing with stagflation for decades. And those economic policies create abundance for the ones at the top, a lot of corruption. They can buy anything they want, and it just steals from everyone else who's not on the teat of the money printer, And that is what's also driving the prices for a lot of things in the stock market and elsewhere right now. They're just printing. And the inflation, the hidden inflation, is going to be pretty massive when it hits. And if you take into account what they're about to do with silver, then it's going to contrast and shine a spotlight on what is going on with the dollar and the money printing and the rigged manipulation. So this takes away government's ability to send billions of dollars overseas for pet projects or spend money on indoctrination. It's very difficult to rule over people when you can't easily steal from them.
Right. Yep. I wanted to I see that for whatever reason, the chat is not working on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube and you're trying to use the chat feature during a live stream, it's not working, unfortunately. And I have a feeling it's because, something got turned off. As we're on the stream, as a matter of fact, the video that I'm using is to make sure we're still live, reset itself somehow. So I suspect that somebody got wind that we were talking about this and killed our ability to have a chat.
Yeah.
If you go to the description, in the description is my Telegram group for Stillness from the Storm. I posted the link there. Join the Telegram group. Get on there. There's already people commenting. Unfortunately, this is what we're dealing with in the world where we've got, negative forces. They're trying to prevent people from doing what we're doing right now, which is talking. So go ahead and check that out.
I can tell you a funny one for that too.
Yeah.
Just today, since I went into this group for the Wall Street bets and I was participating in the conversation, I was asking questions and I was there as a journalist to kind of cover what's going on. In that time, I've had like 3 or 4 different risk management audit type professionals at some of the companies that these folks are talking about targeting find me on LinkedIn. They're like, wow, this guy's sending attention to their way. It's not good. So, there is a system, and it is in fear of what is happening right now, and they are absolutely going to try to stop it. But it's decentralized. There's really not a leader, and silver is in every city, so you can buy it anywhere in the world. They can't stop it.
Yeah, great point. One thing I want to mention too for everybody here is that when these systematic implosions of the stock market and financial markets happen, that's not like the people at the top don't know what's going on. As a matter of fact, it's kind of like a culling. Like, think about it. You want to reorient society. You want to take the big players who have a lot of money, and you want to get them out of the way so you can push your agenda forward. Well, how do you do that? You create some type of financial apocalypse, and then with the financial apocalypse in place, if you know that it's about to happen, you pull all your money out, just like what happened in 1929, and then you keep your money in an asset that you know will be valuable after the flip happens. And that's probably what's happening here. Regardless of whether or not this is planned, honestly, my gut feeling is telling me that what we're going through right now is this isn't some kind of like random event where Redditors like all of a sudden decided to do this. I think this is probably something that was allowed to happen, or even possibly encouraged to happen, to create another financial collapse. And so if you know where to put your money to safeguard it, which is just a prudent thing to do. I mean, listen, guys, we have to eat. You're going to have to deal with this. Then you can get physical silver, and you can also put your money in other resources and assets that will have, lasting staying power. And you won't have a situation where if anything goes wrong, you're out of, you're up Schitt's Creek, to put it mildly. So, I wanted to ask you, like, is it possible that this could be, an alliance move? Are they trying to potentially do something to rob the Wall Street and rob the deep state of financial resources so they can continue their machinations? Any thoughts on that?
If they're smart, they would support it. I think. I don't know if they're behind it because it's sort of decentralized, and it started with a small YouTuber and it grew into this group. This seems to me just to be another Anon exercising his abilities and talents in service of the greater cause. And he's kind of showing people a different way to peacefully and legally destroy them and take them to town and spank them all over the town square for all to see. I mean, you've got hedge fund managers almost crying on TV about this, but I do want to mention that the end game is most likely, from historical precedent, that the government goes back to a gold standard. They'll be forced to do so to restore trust, which is something that they do need, because when trust is lost in the dollar and you hit the tipping point, Venezuela overnight, gold revalued against the Bolivar like 5,000% overnight. Mm-hmm. And we're hitting tipping point. This will force them back onto a gold standard. Most likely they could try to steal it all, but I don't think that would work very well for them. And usually governments, when they go through this, they create a war, because that's how they cover their failings and their mistakes, and how they get society to go through a period of hardship willingly without complaining too much. Because if you're not patriotic and, for the war, you must be the enemy. And that's how they are always going to push it. So I want to, hopefully we won't see a war from this. I know we're very close to something already with China. We're very close in Iran, and we're very close to Russia. And there's also a lot of geopolitical stuff going on with Turkey. It's a tense moment, especially for the currencies to start collapsing. But it's the only way out, and that's up through a glass ceiling built for them to look down on us through.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of people asking right now in the chat, like, what should we do? Should we buy silver? Should we buy this? Should we buy that? I think a really good idea is to buy silver if you can, physical silver, if you can get your hands on it. If you can't buy physical silver, historically, one of the things that has always retained its wealth is real estate. There's lots of different ways to get real estate. If you're somebody who's got financial resources and you can put it in something where you don't have to really take care of, like, you don't have to become a landlord, then you can buy foreclosed property. It's a really good way to buy on cheap, have that foreclosed property. You can even just have it sit there. You don't have to pay that much to maintain it. This is something I was helping an investor back before I got into all this stuff, back in before the real estate crash of 2008. And that's what he was doing. He'd just go and buy as much foreclosed property as he could get his hands on. You can buy it for pennies on the dollar if you know how to get into it. And, you can just, even normal conditions, you can really clean up.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, do you think that this is a situation where people should potentially be buying cryptocurrencies? I mean, before I let you answer that question, I've been into crypto for 3 years now. And one of the things I've done is just trade on the currencies that are not as big as Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's like the big whale and you don't really know. But if you know how to do it right, you can usually eke out a little bit of profit here and there and buy these low value coins now that, you never know. So I kind of have a diversified portfolio, but it's nowhere as big as some people. So any thoughts on, where you think some other places are to safeguard your resources?
I actually have a background as a real estate investor, so I have an opinion about it. But under a communist regime, you have to have a place to live, and it's better to own it than to rent. But
yeah,
they've only got one option when all of this hits the fan, and that's to jack the prices and the taxes on everything that they can, or steal the properties and sell it, right? So if you've got something they can find, then they can take it, and they're going to raise the prices of your taxes. But the cool thing about precious metals is they're going to go up at the same proportion because of inflation, in order to protect you from the increased tax rate. So you'll outlast everyone else, and you'll be the last man standing. And because of the wealth transfer, I mean, historically, a friend of mine, Lynette Zhang, she likes to use this example, but a gold ounce, I think it was just a couple of gold ounces could buy city blocks of commercial real estate when things really hit peaks, when gold's valued and real estate is crashing. So that wealth transfer, imagine from a mall to a couple of gold coins, that can happen. That can happen very quickly when people lose faith in the dollar. So I could touch on, like, I don't advise people to buy anything. I'm going to buy some. I'm going to bury it where no one will ever find it, so they can't steal it from me, and I'm going to forget about it until my kids are older. But I could touch on like how to buy, or forms that you can buy it in, or just some pro tips for people to be safe, if you like.
Yeah. Let's break that down. Before you get into that, I want to just respond to a couple questions real quick. Some things to think about, guys. When things go crazy, you got to ask yourself, well, what is going to be valuable after the fact? And let's just assume that a financial collapse happens, but we still have cell phones, we still have, TVs, we still have things like this. Well, there are certain resources, like, if you had a cell phone, then the cell phone is going to have copper in it. It's going to have, technology in it. So there's ways to invest. I mean, I used to know people that do this. They'd go and find like copper anywhere they could, copper out of houses, and they just stockpile copper because it's almost always valuable. So, if you're sitting there and you got like a few $100 in your pocket, and you're like, what the hell should I be buying? You can go buy stuff like that. You can get it pretty quick. You can find it pretty easily. You just got to find a place to buy copper. Like, you can even find like old electrical stuff like that, get it real cheap, and then just sit in your garage somewhere. That's a really good way to kind of protect your assets. Real estate is really good, like I was mentioning. If you want to get it a little bit more into the deeper aspect of how to make really good money on real estate, you can buy tax certificates. That's a good way to make some cash, but it takes a long time to do. Foreclosed property, that's another good thing to do. Food, there's things you can buy with respect to food, like heirloom seeds, things like this. These things will be valuable even if everything goes crazy and it goes tits up, as they say. So,
yeah. And technically anything that people are going to want, you could buy cigarettes, and they're going to have an expiration date, but you could buy like liquor and stuff like that, and it's going to last a long time, and the value is going to triple, just like the currency's value decreases by threefold. So, technically you could stock up on Pepsi and cola and the things that people are going to want because they're addicted to it anyway, and still have a huge return on your money. I just think that silver and gold, they make the most sense because they're fungible. Doesn't matter what shape or form it's in, all over the world, it'll be accepted anywhere for trade and barter, in any city, pretty much anywhere. And in fact, other countries are encouraging their citizens to buy gold.
Yeah, great point. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how much time you have. I was going to get into some speculation about what might be happening with this, and I know you're kind of short on time, but is there any last suggestions, tips? Do you have any resources where people can buy silver? I know there's some people asking.
I've got a sponsor. I'm doing this more of a pro bono, just to help people understand what's happening. I didn't expect to plug my own sponsor, but if you want me to. But effectively, there's a couple of quick tricks to know. One is if you're buying it locally, learn about like how to make sure you're buying the real deal. Some of the forms that you could buy it in, don't buy like fractional half an ounce kind of stuff. You're not going to get a very good margin. Look for the margin. So, instead of buying 1,000-ounce bar to get the best deal, you can usually find a pretty good margin on the old junk coins, which are the 90% silver, 1964 and before, quarters, dimes, halves, which were, they're still technically legal tender, but they're small, less than an ounce, easy to barter trade. They make great tips, great gifts. They're good for that kind of thing. And that's throughout most of history, the kind of money humanity used: small silver currency and coins. Gold was for rich people. But, there's a little bit of silver left locally because they haven't been hit as hard yet, and they're going to open back up Monday morning. That's an opportunity maybe. The person that sponsors my show and where I get my silver from when I have savings is Sovereign Advisors, Dr. Kirk Elliott, who's a PhD economist. He's a frequent guest on my show. And he's an all-around good guy who wants to help people, but he has a couple of benefits to his service. Like when you buy silver or gold from him and you sell it back later, he'll honor the full spot price. Most of the time they give you like 5% less because that's how they do their margins and stuff. So he's got some pretty good values as well in terms of prices and margins. So best I've seen, and he also supports free speech. So you should sign up and become, just my thought, maybe have him sponsor you as well.
Yeah, I actually put in a form because we were talking about this last night, and I actually sent a request to get signed up because that'd obviously be help.
Then also, make sure to tell them that Justin sent you, not me.
I appreciate that, Dustin. Yeah. So, well, listen, Dustin, I really appreciate you coming on. Is there any last things you want to share with everybody before we close out your segment?
I mean, I think that's it. I hit all of my notes. I even thought of some new ones as we went. And I'm excited about it because even if we fall short, we're going to do massive damage to their suppression. And, even if it stops right now and the whole group disappeared, we have just created probably 6 million more very awake financially people. And this is a nonpartisan issue. There's people on the left who are in this as well because they hate the system and they want to stick it to the capitalists. So you're going to create a lot more stackers, people that are going to long-term value gold and silver, and they're going to start to hoard it because for that inevitable day we all see coming. You've got preppers out there with large stashes of guns and ammo and gold and silver and food and stuff. And I think you're going to start to see more of that.
Right. Yeah, precisely. There's lots of ways to prepare. And, when you know that something's coming, you can prepare to safeguard yourself and take advantage of the situation at the same time. There's nothing ethically wrong with that. If you were stealing from somebody else or you were trying to prevent somebody from surviving, that's another story. So there's nothing ethically wrong with trying to safeguard your resources and your assets. So
this is like plugging the hole in the bucket where they're just draining money out of. If you've got a bucket of sand or water, it's got a hole in the bottom and they're just draining it all the time. This plugs the hole. Right.
Yep, exactly. Well, listen, Dustin, I really appreciate you coming on. Where can everybody find you these days?
We're still at Nemos News Network and Bitchute, YouTube, Rumble, and Gab. I think that's about it now. We're down to about just that. Right. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, you got it, Dustin. Great to have you on. Have a great rest of your night. Talk to you soon.
Good night, guys.
All right, everybody. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here. I'm going to break down the situation. I know there's some people asking in the chat. For those of you just jumping on, before I get into that, I want to ask everybody, please go to stillnessinthestorm.com/donate. That's stillnessinthestorm.com/donate. You can also find the link in the description below. Really need your help. We're doing our best to put out information that as I often like to say, they don't want you to see. And so big tech has worked really hard to prevent news outlets like me and other ones from generating the revenue they need to survive and to really thrive. And, Stillness has exploded in a really big way over the past few months. And we want to keep providing you the news and information that they don't want you to see. And we couldn't do that without your support. So please, if you haven't already, go to stillnessinthestorm.com/donate and get yourself a subscription through Subscribe Star, or make a one-time donation. It doesn't take much and it'll go a long way to help us keep the lights on and keep everything going. And we got a lot of awesome things down the pike coming, and we really appreciate your support. Another way to support us is to go to Stillness in the Storm /EMF Harmonized, and you can get one of these cool discs, Tesla technology discs, that'll literally take the toxic Wi-Fi and electromagnetic radiation coming from cell phones and transmute it into something positive. It's amazing technology. I know the guy who put the company together, and it's really cool stuff. So go ahead and check that out. All right, so what is happening? Like, what is the deal here exactly? Is it this GameStop thing connected to something else? Well, I'm going to break down, as far as I can tell, what is going on. So I'm going to give you my best honest answer, and then what we can do given what's happening. So for those of you who don't know, there is a situation that happened last week. Basically, some people, and regular people on this Reddit thread, and using Robinhood, which is a trading app, were able to purchase stocks of GameStop while the hedge fund was trying to systematically implode the price. So this is the way this works. Hedge funds pick a company, they get a hold of the majority of the stock. So all of the market share, there's like, let's say there's 100 shares of a company, they'll get 80 of those shares, and they'll have a mass sell-off because there's a surplus of the shares that drops the price significantly. And then they have to buy back those shares after they've had the sell-off. And so instead of having to buy back the shares at like 100% of their value, they buy them back at 20% of their value. And so they make a ton of money in this systematic destruction, literally leaching value out of the company, you might say. So some people using Reddit, I believe, what is it called? Wall Street Hacks, I think. Don't quote me on that. They were buying up these stocks as this short sale was happening, and it drove the price up significantly. So regular people were able to undermine this kind of what we might call like a parasitic leaching of value out of a company. And that's really, I think it's pretty cool. And a lot of people, the interesting thing about the situation is across both sides of the aisle, like whether you're a rabid foaming at the mouth leftist or you're, a MAGA patriot, everybody agrees that this is really corrupt and this probably shouldn't be happening. And, boo-hoo for these massive billionaires on Wall Street that use this systematic leaching of wealth out of a company to make money, and they miss their opportunity this time. Well, Robinhood and I want to say several other exchanges literally prevented regular people from buying stock. So it's pretty unprecedented. I mean, it's literally a rigged game. I was watching a commenter on this earlier this week, and they were talking about how, for them to go and do this, it makes completely obvious that we do not live in a capitalistic system. We don't have capitalism. We have a rigged economy. It's been rigged for a really long time. So that's what happened with the stock market. Now, what Dustin was talking about, to recap it, is that there is an opportunity here with respect to the silver market, because with the silver market, the same basic thing is happening. They closed off people's ability to buy silver. And it's entirely likely that the suppression of the silver market's about to end. What that means is that they've been artificially manipulating the price of silver for a really long time. So what silver should be, one estimate I saw when I was getting into this a couple of years ago, is that gold, I think, is, I don't know exactly where it's at, but it's somewhere on the order of like, I think $1,500 an ounce right now, or higher. So it's in the thousands of dollars an ounce. Silver is at like the $20, $30, $40 an ounce. I think it's somewhere sitting in the 30s right now. It should be up as high as gold, if not more, because silver is used to a much greater extent. So why is it that the price is so low? Well, it's because they print what are called counterfeit silver certificates that artificially lower the price, just in the same way the kind of hedge fund does, and it prevents the price from going up. So if you own silver right now, and this removal of the artificial suppression of silver happens, then the price of silver is going to go from like $20, $30, $40 an ounce to like $1,000 an ounce, maybe more. And that's where the opportunity is. Now, the benefit of really trying to use our buying power effectively and our financial resources effectively is we can actually develop systems of exchange that prevent us from being parasitized or leached off of by the cabal and these big banks. I mean, when you keep your money in a savings account, the bank takes that savings account money. It's called fractional reserve banking. You might be familiar with it. And in the book Modern Money Mechanics, I believe, it was a book that talked all about this. You can go find copies of this right now. And they'll lend more money than they actually have. So, but the point is, if you keep your money in savings, then they can take that money that's on the books and they can lend a certain amount above that. Sometimes it's 5 times, sometimes it's 10 times, sometimes it's 100 times. It depends on what the laws of the land are, so to speak, at that time, at that place. So the opportunity here is this. First of all, if you're not aware of how this manipulation works, then it's an opportunity to safeguard your family and your wealth. You know, there's a lot of people who've retired or they've worked really hard in their life and they've got a pension or whatever it is, and you want to protect yourself. I mean, this is perfectly reasonable. Then there's ways to buy up financial resources using silver, using real estate, using precious metals like copper, platinum, all sorts of different things that if a massive financial fallout happens, you'll be able to safeguard yourself and your family and protect your retirement. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Now, what's interesting is if you get the right kind of financial resources and you're asking me like, well, Justin, what are you saying? Like, please just tell me where I can put my money and I'll do it. Well, first of all, I'm not a financial advisor, so I'm not saying I have the perfect magic pill for you. And that's kind of the thing, is that nobody necessarily knows where to put your money to make it perfectly safe. What we do know is that throughout history, and this happened in the stock crash of 1929, it happened in the 80s, it happened in 2008, is that if you can pay attention to who the big cats are and how they're moving their money around, then you can sometimes predict where the safe place to put your money is. Generally speaking, real estate tends to be a pretty good place to keep your money if you can do it. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies might be a good way. Now, for me, I don't have a lot of financial resources to work with, but the little I do have, I've spread out in a cryptocurrency portfolio and some other places, and just to try to protect myself. So, and if something happens, then, you know, who knows? It might be a benefit because now we have resources in a crypto market which we can use without necessarily, you know, having to deal with the big banks. Now, the big banks are terrified of the crypto market for a lot of reason, because, you know, if I make sprockets, if I produce a course, if I write a book, you know, things like this, and you want to buy it, well, we have to use Federal Reserve notes. We have to use bank credit often. But if we use cryptocurrency, which we can now, then we can exchange money, we can exchange goods and services using this cryptocurrency, and it's outside of the central banking system to a certain extent. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, hold on one second here. Let me just take a look at the chat. For those of you who don't know, if you go to the description of this video and you go to Telegram, I have a group set up on Telegram. If you comment on one of the video that's in the Telegram right now for this, you can start to have a discussion with people. There's a bunch of people right now talking on Telegram about what's going on and, you know, how do we do this? So, you know, the good news is every time an event like this happens, it highlights the corruption in a really powerful way. You know, not a lot of people know about this stuff, but because of what happened as a result of the GameStop revolution, or the GameStop short, as they're calling it, there's a lot of people who are aware of the manipulation that's happening at a massive level within our government. Okay, so I'm going to tell you some of my thoughts on this. Now, I want to make abundantly clear what I'm about to share is not like, you know, gospel. I'm just a guy like you. I study these things. I've studied the financial system. I've studied law. I've studied history, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Now, I can tell you that throughout history, and again, I'm going to cite The Secret of Oz by Bill Still. It's a really good kind of short documentary to understand how this financial warfare happens between the oligarchic and plutocratic powers, or the big cats in the world, or the cabal. What they use is they use financial resources and, you know, financial warfare. They'll take an economy, they'll make a fundamental rule change to that economy, like they did with the Romans. This also happened, by the way, in the United States in, I believe it was the 1890s. We had silver and gold as the backing for the currency back then. Well, some people decided that we should go to a gold standard. And this is something that people who think gold standard is like the saving grace is their heads are going to a little short a minute, but you have to listen to this here. The history tells us a lot if you take the time to study it. So again, Secret of Oz, check that documentary out. We switched to a gold standard, and all of the people who had money with respect to silver lost it because you could no longer use it to do anything. It was now a silver backing to the currency, and it created a massive, I believe, 20-year depression. In some respects, it was worse than what we experienced in the Great Depression, although, you can't necessarily compare these things like apples to apples. The same thing happened in in Rome. When the Rome switched from a republic to an empire, they were using a kind of fiat currency. They were using cheap currency. So they were using copper coins, I believe, is one of the big ones. And there were a lot of wealth they had a massive middle class to a certain extent, comparatively speaking. They had a lot of people who had different wealth. And when they switched to a gold standard, people who had these various assets and resources lost everything, and they had to sell off like massive portions of their estates just to try to get basic cost of living and food. So switching to a gold standard isn't necessarily the best thing in the world. I know a lot of people think it is, but it isn't. And this is the point I was making earlier, is that you have to think about it like a game. The laws of any country, and especially the economy, is like a game. Who's deciding the rules? If the rule is that we have a fiat currency, then when a gold standard comes in, then that changes the rules, which is going to affect the system. So we can't just blindly think that gold or silver or whatever is going to be the magic solution. We have to think multivalently or multidimensionally. And what that means is we have to think about possibilities. Like, okay, what if we're about to go through a systematic destruction of the economy right now, which I think we're on the way to that for a lot of reasons, which I'll get into in a minute here. Then, well, how bad is it going to get? And what will retain its value? Now, the secret behind all money is that the thing that determines value is not a bank. It's not gold. It's not silver. It's not US dollars versus Bitcoin versus anything like that. It's us. When I have something that you want, we decide what we want to use to exchange that value, which we traditionally call trade and barter. So if we're back to a barter and trade situation, then it's a really good idea, if you have the financial resources, to accumulate wealth in the form of something that can be bartered and traded. Dustin brought up a really good point. Old coins. So you get two for the price of one here. This is something really cool about coins. If you find coins that were minted with true silver, real silver, then it has use now. So you can literally take that 50-cent piece and you can go spend it today if you need to, and it'll be worth the 50 cents that's printed on it. But if everything goes tits up and the whole financial system's completely belly up, and we're back to you having to figure out how many silver pieces you need to do to get your food for that night, and you're talking to another human being, then you have to use your powers of persuasion, barter and trade and haggling to be like, listen, this is a real silver piece here. This is going to have value because other people think it's valuable. So what are you going to give me for the silver piece? So the cool thing about the silver coins is that they have value now with respect to being a currency, meaning the United States has said this coin is worth 50 cents. But if everything goes crazy, then you'll be able to get value for that currency, even if the financial system goes completely crazy. Now, what could be happening with this? This is my theory. I don't think it's an accident that the Great Reset has been marketed. We've been hearing about it for a year. The Great Reset, the Great Reset. The Prime Minister of Canada, he was talking about this opportunity given the pandemic to reimagine the economy. The World Economic Forum has a website all about the Great Reset. So this isn't some wild conspiracy theory. Like, economists and bigwigs are talking about, given the financial hardship of what's happened with the pandemic, that we have an opportunity to reimagine the financial system. What do they want to reimagine? Well, what I'm pretty sure of is they want to create a universal basic income system. And a lot of people think that universal basic income is great. Sounds pretty cool, right? The government's just going to give you money to live. Oh, sounds awesome. But is it? I mean, what happens if you're somebody like me? You don't like the fact that you can't talk about certain issues and you want to tell people the truth and you want to be an entrepreneur. Then they're going to try to shut people like me down. And now I can't rely on my government stipend to survive. And so that what that does is it reshifts the game, so to speak, if we have a universal basic income system. And it makes it so that if you don't play ball, if you don't play the way that the controllers want you to play, then your ability to survive is going to be robbed from you. And what will they do? They'll create a situation where just surviving will require a government stipend. I mean, think about that. I mean, that's like socialism, like to Karl Marx wet dream doesn't even touch that, something like that, right? So that's something to think about. I think what's happening, this is just a theory. So let me just pause for a moment and talk about discernment and analysis of information. One of the things you discover when you start to study epistemology, which is kind of the science of how do you believe anything and how do you know whether something is true or false, is that there are no black and white answers to things. So the sooner you can get out of the black and white camp of just tell me what to believe and I'll just believe that, the better off you're going to be. The real game in town is possibilities. You got to ask yourself about possibilities. Think about it like this. If you don't know what weather you're going to encounter when you go on a vacation, then should you look at the weather report and assume that the weather report is 100% true and just base your whole reality on what the weatherman's telling you? Well, you could, but then what if they're wrong? Now you're in a situation where you don't have the warm clothes you need because it's a lot colder than the weatherman said when you were traveling. What's better to do is to think about possibilities. Well, either A, it'll be warm, or B, it'll be cold, and let me plan for both and look to see which one might be true as time goes on. So that's one of the keys to discernment, everybody, is that if you want to know whether or not something's true or not, you got to look at what's being claimed. You got to look at the data that supports it. And then you got to ask yourself, how likely is this to be true based on what I know? How plausible is it? And what that means is you got to entertain multiple different possibilities at once. So we're going to go through an exploration of what that is here. What is the possibility of this situation being manufactured? So in other words, let me make myself abundantly clear here. How likely is it that this the short of GameStop and various other companies that happened last week? Etsy, I believe, is one of them. I think GMC, although don't quote me on that, was another one. So there's several stocks that were in the pipeline to be shorted and have this systematic leaching happen. And it has all the telltale signs of some type of financial warfare event happening. What if that happens? Well, think about what else is happening. We have this great reset. We have a history of, these globalists taking advantage of crises. So if the fact that there is a crisis at all and the news and the media is covering it, and it's like this new amazing story, like this story right now that we're talking about is probably as big, if potentially not bigger, than the election because it's a global phenomenon, then you got to ask yourself, why are people talking about this? The second thing to think about is the Great Reset. The Great Reset is happening. They want to push a Great Reset. Joe Biden has openly talked about the Great Reset being something that's important. He's also made moves and made positions where he wants to have, a Green New Deal type of a situation. Chuck Schumer last week was talking about him declaring an environmental emergency that would give him extraordinary powers to reorganize the whole of society to protect against global warming or climate change. So, this isn't like conspiracy theory stuff, guys. This is like stuff that they're actively doing right now. If you put these pieces on the table, we have a massive financial event that is causing people to rethink and call for reorganization of the financial system itself. We have stock markets and various agencies and organizations preventing regular people from buying into the stock market and taking advantage of the situation. You have this financial reset happening. You have a president that's very sympathetic to all of these things in office right now. You've got a deep state that's been talking about this stuff for years, Agenda 2030. which is basically the Great Reset. So, once you see all of these pieces are on the table right now, all of these pieces of the game board are actively on the board right now. So given all of those things, is it likely that we could be seeing some type of manufactured financial event to usher in a crisis like we saw in 2008? So we have to save the too big to fail, whatever needs to be saved. Is it going to be the stock market? Is it going to be the economy in general? Think about it. We had a pandemic that caused a massive economic recession and issues across the planet. We've got this global stock market thing that's happening right now. But Dustin Emos, who we just had on, was talking about there being a $3.5 to $4 trillion fallout from this. Are we going to start to have some type of societal collapse scenario where the savior of the societal collapse is a great reset of the economy? I can imagine the headlines now. GameStop short caused by domestic terrorists who are trying to take advantage of a financial situation caused a massive economic depression, the likes of which we have not seen in recent history. And the only way to save your pension, the only way to save the price of the dollar, the only way to ensure that you have a job to go to because all these companies are over leveraged, is to have a reimagining of the financial system. Doesn't sound too far off, does it? Well, so that's the kind of dark possibility. So just to summarize all that, what if the bad guys, what if the deep state was intentionally using the situation that they've manufactured to systematically implode the economy yet again, which they've done this throughout history, so that they can take money and financial resources and assets out of the people that have them now, redistribute wealth, make a ton of money in the process, and reorganize the financial system in a way that this great reset agenda that they've been talking about openly comes to pass. If I was a betting man, I'd say that's probably pretty likely, barring anything else. So if there was no alliance, if it was just like dark dystopic hell, which some people think, I don't think so, but some people think that there is no military alliance. Trump was never a good guy. The military insider, I have to be careful what I say on YouTube, the military insider that was talking about a lot of things on 4chan, 8chan, and 8kun is made up and is a LARP. I don't think that is the case. I think there is an alliance, but some people think there is no alliance. Then if you were just to look at those pieces, the picture kind of paints is that, yeah, we're definitely in the reorganization of society that they've been talking about. So the question is, what do you do? Where can you put your financial resources? How can you develop community relationships so when things go crazy, you're not reliant on the system? I mean, this is what, if you want to read a really good book that gets into this, that are kind of like deep level, there's a book called Tara. If you go to, actually, I'll put it in the description of this video when I'm done. It's called Tara, and it talks about the merchant class, the banking class. And what they do is they destroy trust between me and you so that they can come in with a solution that involves money and, reorganizing society and saviors like that. So they don't want me and you to figure out a way to produce our own food and have an economy that's independent of the cabal. They want us to be dependent on their solutions. So what's a good way to guard against that? Well, we form trust. We don't rely on their system. We take advantage of our own resources and our own knowledge to learn the law, learn how to negotiate and trust each other, learn how to create exchanges and our own marketplaces so that we can have the food we need, so that we can work together, so we can have communities, so we can safeguard our lives and the lives of our children from the machinations of these manipulators. I mean, that is a solution. At the ground level, that's what I think the solution is, regardless of what's going to happen. Now, let me paint a different picture. One second. One thought I had is that what if the situation with the stock market was actually a way to implode the financial system that the cabal are using so that positive forces can take advantage of it? I mean, think about it. Like, what's happening with Trump right now? A lot of people think that the alliance, we'll put it that way, failed because Biden got into office. I don't actually think that's the case. I put out in the last Where's the Hope article, which you can go to stillnessinthestorm.com. If you go to browse or start here, I should say, start, and look for Where's the Hope. In the last one, the 11th edition of this, we talk about, what might have been going on. And I think, given all things considered, I don't actually think that the plan, what I'm talking about, people out there, was to stop Biden from getting in office. I actually think Biden getting in office was part of the plan to a certain extent. You might be thinking, and that's crazy. But this is, again, I'm just sharing a possibility. I'm not telling you 100% this is what's happening. I'm considering possibilities. This is what the really deep thinkers do. This is what the military does. Not saying I'm the smartest guy in the world, but the military does this. Brilliant people do this. I'm going to try my hand at this, and I think you should too. So why is it that they would want Biden to be in office? Well, think about it. What did Trump do when he came into office? He did something that I don't think a lot of people were expecting. I certainly wasn't expecting it when Trump took office in 2017. He reawakened the patriotic spirit of America and, by extension, the world. I mean, millions of people have reawakened within them the desire for truth, freedom, and prosperity. That dream of actually having a good life, and that we can play a role in making that good life a reality and safeguard ourselves against corrupt forces, has been reimagined. It's alive again. We are literally in our kind of like 1776 moment. As a matter of fact, for those of you into astrology, my fiance is really into this, so she's been telling me about this. There was an eclipse that happened in, don't ask me about the details, but there was an eclipse that happened in 1776, I believe. And that same type of cycle of eclipse is happening again. And it happened, I want to say, like a few months ago. So it's the exact same type of astrological energy. Now, you might be thinking, Justin, who gives a damn about astrology? Well, as it turns out, the CABAL give a damn about astrology. They call it celestial mechanics. And at the very high levels of the deep state, the CABAL, the Order of the Black Sun, they are totally into this stuff. So if you think these guys didn't time the Great Reset and the reimagining of the entire world economy and the global legal and lawful system to coincide with a massive celestial event, you're dreaming, because these guys do. And whether you cared about it or not doesn't matter. They care about it, and they will plan and coordinate their events around it. So what if an alliance came and put a massive wrench in the gears by having somebody like Trump get elected to office, who then systematically reawakened the patriotic spirit? Well, I liken it to somebody who's been eating, we might call like gruel their whole lives. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, that's very similar to the, what is it? I think it's Pluto's cave or Aristotle's caves. It's the idea that you've been in prison your whole life and you don't know it. And then somebody comes and tells you, hey, you've been in prison and look how awesome the world is outside. And so you look outside and you're like, oh my God, the world's way more beautiful than I thought. And then now you have something that you didn't know you had. It feels great, right? It's like, oh man, this is awesome. But somebody gave it to you. Trump came in and reawakened this patriotic spirit, and he reawakened this within us. He certainly reawakens it in me and people across the world. But are we willing to fight for something that we didn't necessarily invest ourselves in to begin with? Well, basically, in short, the answer is no. Most people aren't. But now that you have it, now that you're not eating gruel anymore and you've actually got a taste of a real meal, are you just going to go back to eating gruel and just shut up and sit down and just go along to get along? I don't think so. As a matter of fact, I'm constantly running into people in the everyday world. I just had a conversation with two people yesterday. I was returning this Amazon package, and I'm walking past this guy and this girl talking, and I hear two words. I hear aliens and conspiracy, and as in a joke, I was like, it's always aliens. And I just keep walking, and he's like, turns around, he's like, oh man. And then we just getting into this really awesome conversation. And we're talking about how we believe Trump wasn't part of the establishment. And, there's a lot of people who believe the election was rigged. I was getting a root canal the other day, and the dentist and the assistant were talking about how they think the election was rigged. So, I mean, regular people, I'm running into them all of the time. They do not believe in the deep state anymore. The cabal have lost their power to control and manipulate the people. That patriotic spirit has been reawakened. And so I know I kind of took a long time to get to the final point of this more positive outlook and interpretation of the events. But think about it this way. Now that we've had a taste for freedom, are we willing to fight for our freedom? if you take that away from people, more to the point, because it's not like Trump took anything away from people, I strongly suggest to you that Trump knew that the election of 2020 was going to be rigged. He knew that Biden was going to steal the election. And he wanted to make it really obvious. That's why he campaigned his ass off. He had some of the best rally events in human history, probably. He probably had something like, I don't know, at least 80 million voters, at least as much as they're telling us Biden got. Probably way more. Probably something like, I don't know, I'm just going to throw a number out there, like 100 billion people voted for Trump potentially in this election. So they knew that they had to cheat. As Sidney Powell has revealed, they used massive cheating through Dominion, through ballot harvesting, through mail-in voting, and we caught them. There's evidence galore. There's tons of websites. There's awesome groups that are covering it. We covered a bunch of it on Stillness in the Storm. You can go and find it all on your own. So it's not that they didn't cheat and we don't have the evidence. We got tons of evidence. But what happened? Instead of these election officials doing what they should have done to prevent the fraud from happening, they let it go on. Instead of governors and other officials not certifying elections because there was fraud, they certified a fraudulent election. Instead of the Republicans and the Democrats meeting in Congress on the 6th and contesting and objecting to the election to expose the fraud so that we could have a re-election or something different, or disqualifying Biden for the massive fraud, they allowed the Electoral College votes to be counted for Biden, and Biden became the president-elect. And then on top of all of that, we have massive instances of court cases that they didn't look at a shred of evidence. You know, I talked to some people and they're like, oh, but Justin, don't you trust our judicial system? They looked at these court cases and they didn't see that there was any fraud, evidence of fraud. Well, no, actually they didn't. First of all, do you know that they looked at any cases of fraud? Because I know for a fact they didn't. I looked at these cases. I saw the reasons why they dismissed the cases, and they didn't dismiss them because there was lack of evidence. They dismissed them for technicalities, and they never looked at the evidence. So it's a pretty good axiom, philosophy, and truth seeking. It's this: you can't prove or disprove that something exists without actually looking at the evidence. And that's what these courts did. So we've got fraud across the board, and anybody who's got half a clue knows it. I think the last poll I saw was that I think it was like 70% of Republicans believed that there was massive fraud in the election, and 30% of Democrats believed that there was massive fraud in the election. So anybody who, like I said, who's got more than 3 neurons firing in their head is like thinking, man, this election was rigged and there was fraud. Like I said, I keep running into people. And so when a government allows massive fraud to take place and they literally break the laws of the land to push through a fraudulent leader like Joe Biden, what do you think that tells these millions of patriots that have been reawakened? Well, what it tells them is that we're living under a totalitarian dictatorship. We are living in not a free state. We're not living in a free country. We live in a fraudulent country, a fake country. We live in the American nightmare, the global nightmare, as a matter of fact. And do you really think that all of these people who've been woken up over the past 4 years are just going to go back to eating gruel? No, I don't think so at all. And I think this was by design. I think the alliance, my belief, my theory right now, and again, this is my theory, so I'm looking at the possibilities, is the current theory that I place a lot of bets on, you might say, is that the alliance, the positive military alliance that was posting on 4chan and 8chan and 8kun, knew that there was going to be massive fraud. They knew that they had the evidence. They allowed it to pass through the normal means of government. They knew that these politicians and the court system were going to let the fraud go through. And it was because we needed to see the fraud for ourselves. And now we're living in a country where we got what we wanted, or some people got what they wanted. I didn't want it, but we have Joe Biden. He's been systematically went on almost every campaign promise that he made over the past year. He's enacted more executive orders in the past less than 2 weeks than any other president in history. So there are a lot of people that are like, man, I didn't want this to happen. So what does that mean? Well, there's somebody I work with who says this. It's really, I think it's a great saying, that 100 pissed off Americans are worth 10,000, pissed off other people. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that Americans are like, the saviors of humanity necessarily, but what I think it means is that when people have a taste for true freedom, which is a God-given right, then they will fight to the death to protect it. And that's what we need. That's what we're going through right now. I'm not saying that there's going to be a massive war, but I think we are leading up to a kind of discontent. I liken it to like a hand being put over the fire. You didn't necessarily know that there was a problem before the past 4 years. You believed that, maybe Trump was going to potentially get in despite all the fraud, but that didn't happen because we needed to see that this very government that we've come to rely on is corrupt to the fucking core. Excuse me for swearing, but I need to say it. And now, if something positive happens, if there is some type of, whether it's a tribunal, whether we have a military takeover, whether we have whatever, I don't know what it will be, but there could be all sorts of things. I don't know if you knew this, but Mar-a-Lago, where Trump is currently staying, where he's had his estate in Florida, was called the Winter White House for a long time. Is it possible that maybe Biden isn't really the leader? Well, from a lawful and legal perspective, he stole the election. There was massive fraud. He is a foreign actor. So, I mean, there are like literally laws on the books right now that would prevent him from being in office had the judicial system and had the government honestly looked at them. Do you really think people in the military who swore an oath to the Constitution, who the vast majority of which are Christians and true patriots, are just going to allow this to happen and us to slip into a dystopic hell? I don't think so. But here's the problem. This is what I talked about in a few articles I published. This military event cannot happen. This rebirth of the American dream cannot happen if we, the people, don't see that there's a problem, if our patriotic spirit isn't catalyzed so that we can do something positive about it. So the white knights can swoop in and, save the day. But if we don't actually care and we don't see that this is actually a good thing, and then we don't participate in creating a rule of law society that is better than what we had before, then the military may not act, or it won't be successful even if it does happen. That's the point I was making. So anyway, a lot to talk about there, lots to consider. I want to thank everybody so much. There's a lot of interesting things happening. I think this week might be huge. I think we're going to see a lot of different events happen. If you've enjoyed this program, again, please go to stillnessinthestorm/donate. Stillnessinthestorm/donate. Please give us a donation. We could really use your support. I've got a lot of awesome stuff happening. I've got some series in the works right now that are going to blow the lid on a lot of stuff, a lot of the old history that we hear about. What really happened in the Civil War? Why is it that the Civil War took place and somehow the United States was signing treaties with Great Britain in the middle of a war, in a civil war, mind you? That normally doesn't happen. Why is it that Wall Street went bankrupt because of what was happening there in the Civil War, and somehow the Bank of England bailed us out? What did we have to pay? What did we have to promise? What did we have to do as an American nation after the Civil War to keep our promises to the Bank of England? There's lots of questions, lots of interesting things are going to happen. Why did we go from a republic to a corporation, which a lot of people don't realize? What was the original 13th Amendment? What was the Organic Act? Think about these questions. I'm Justin Deschamps from Stillness in the Storm. If you love our work, please support us. Really appreciate it. Love to hear your feedback. Go leave a comment below this video. Join my Telegram. I'm in there constantly talking and posting stuff. I try to be more engaged in there than I am normally. But we're in an amazing time in history right now. And despite the fact that things seem to be going crazy, we've actually got a lot of amazing things happening behind the scenes, particularly in you. If you care about the truth, if you care about freedom and prosperity, if you care enough to take the blinders off and rebirth who you are so that we can retake our world in a positive way, in a rule of law way, with minimal harm, then we can do so many amazing things. So it's actually one of the best times to be alive in history.